Los Angeles. The sprawling city of lights, opportunity, and, just beneath the surface, violence. By the mid-2000s, its streets were gripped by a criminal empire that most residents never saw, but everyone felt. This empire wasn't just another street gang. It was something bigger, something darker. That empire was the Mexican Mafia, known on the street simply as La M. From behind the walls of California's most notorious prisons, Mexican Mafia shot callers reached out like invisible hands, controlling vast networks of gangs, dealers, and hustlers. Their reach stretched from South Los Angeles to the San Gabriel Valley, dictating who could sell drugs, who could collect money, and who would live or die. One of the Mexican Mafia's most brutal methods of control was something deceptively simple: taxation. To the Mexican Mafia, taxation wasn't about public funds or government services. It was about tribute, extortion, a street-level tax imposed on anyone who dared to sell drugs in neighborhoods under IME control. Whether you were a seasoned gang member or a small-time dealer just trying to survive, the rules were the same: pay your share or face the consequences. This tax was usually enforced through local gangs loyal to the Mafia. These gangs, 18th Street, Florencia 13, Puente 13, and countless others, acted as enforcers, collectors, and executioners. The money flowed upward, lining Mafia coffers and keeping the machine of violence and fear alive. And if you didn't pay, the Mafia made an example of you. In 2006, one such example unfolded in chilling fashion. A man, a drug dealer, but not a gang member, found himself caught in the web of this extortion system. His crime was not murder, not betrayal, not violence against others. His only mistake was failing to hand over his share of profits to the Mafia. For that, the order went out, and the triggerman chosen to enforce it was Porky Garcia, a soldier of the notorious 18th Street gang. The killing was swift, brutal, and calculated. A murder not just of one man, but of an idea. The idea that anyone could defy the Mexican Mafia and survive. Nearly a decade later, Garcia's role in the killing would finally come to light, revealing the chilling efficiency of IME's taxation system. His case offers a window into how one of the most feared prison gangs in America maintains its grip on the streets through violence, intimidation, and death. This is not just the story of one murder. It is the story of how the Mexican Mafia enforces its will, how ordinary lives are shattered in the process, and how even from behind prison walls, the Mafia's power bleeds out onto the streets of Los Angeles. This is the story of Porky Garcia, and the murder that showed what happens when you refuse to pay the tax. By 2006, Porky Garcia was no stranger to the life of gangs and violence. A soldier in the 18th Street gang, Garcia had grown up in one of Los Angeles's most infamous neighborhoods. The 18th Street gang was vast, sprawling, and loyal to the Mexican Mafia. Like many others, Garcia was part of a system much bigger than himself. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't calling shots. He was an enforcer, useful, disposable, and deadly. That year, a conflict emerged between the Mafia and a local drug dealer. The dealer wasn't a gang member. He wasn't connected to any rivals. But he made one fatal mistake. He refused to pay the tax. The Mexican Mafia doesn't send warnings. It sends messages. And those messages are written in blood. The order came down from a member of the Mafia who oversaw the Puente 13 gang. Like countless times before, the instruction was simple: find the dealer and make an example out of him. Fear was the lifeblood of the Mafia's taxation system. If one man could get away with defying them, others might try. That could never be allowed. Eddie Garcia was chosen as the triggerman. Whether it was loyalty, fear, or ambition that drove him, Garcia accepted the task. For him, pulling the trigger wasn't just about punishment. It was about proving his worth to the organization that controlled his world. The night of the killing was unremarkable to most of Los Angeles. But for one man, it was the end. Garcia carried out the execution with precision, cold, direct. There was no negotiation, no second chance. The victim was gunned down. His life ended not because of personal rivalry, but because of business. He hadn't paid. And in the brutal economy of the Mexican Mafia, that was enough. In the aftermath, fear rippled through the community. The message was loud and clear. You don't defy la M. Every dealer, every hustler, every small-time criminal in the area heard what had happened. The victim's death was a warning etched into the streets. Pay your tax, or you could be next. For years, the murder remained unsolved. In neighborhoods where the mafia's influence ran deep, witnesses kept silent. Speaking to the police was a death sentence of its own. Families mourned quietly, communities whispered, and the case grew cold. To outsiders, it became just another unsolved killing in Los Angeles, a city that had seen far too many. But for the Mexican Mafia, the killing had already served its purpose. The victim was gone, and the lesson had been taught. Garcia went on with his life, carrying the weight of the murder but shielded by the Mafia's shadow. The crime faded into the background, buried beneath the endless cycle of gang violence. Yet justice, slow and relentless, was still moving. Nearly a decade later, Eddie "Porky" Garcia would no longer be able to hide from what he had done. And the murder from a 2006 would resurface, not as a forgotten case file, but as a key piece of evidence in the ongoing war between law enforcement and the Mexican Mafia. To understand Eddie "Porky" Garcia's crime, you have to understand the system that demanded it. Garcia wasn't a rogue killer, hunting down enemies for personal gain. He was a soldier in a hierarchy that stretched far beyond his neighborhood. At the top of that hierarchy sat the Mexican Mafia. The Mexican Mafia, La M, was born in California's prison yards in the late 1950s. From its earliest days, its leaders realized that power inside prison walls could extend outward. Over time, they built a system that allowed them to control street gangs across Southern California. One of their most powerful tools was taxation. Here's how it worked. Each neighborhood gang, whether it was 18th Street, Florencia 13, or Puente 13, operated under the shadow of the Mafia. If a Mafia member claimed control of a territory, every dealer in that area had to pay. The money flowed upward, enriching Mafia members locked away in prisons like Pelican Bay or Folsom. On the streets, their soldiers, loyal gang members, made sure no one broke the rules. The murder in 2006 was one of those enforcements. The victim had been targeted not because he was a rival gang member, but because he hadn't paid. For the Mafia, it was never personal. It was business. At the time, Puente 13, a gang based in La Puente, east of Los Angeles, was under the thumb of a Mexican Mafia member. That member's word carried the weight of life and death. When the victim failed to pay his tax, the Mafia issued an order through Puente 13. From there, it landed on the shoulders of Eddie Garcia. This was the structure of control. Mafia members gave orders, neighborhood gangs carried them out. Soldiers like Garcia were the enforcers, ensuring compliance through fear. The victim's murder wasn't random. It was carefully orchestrated to send a ripple effect through the community. What makes this system chilling is its efficiency. Mafia members, often serving life sentences, could dictate murders on the outside without ever leaving their cells. A single coded message, A phone call or even a smuggled letter was enough to seal a person's fate. For Garcia, the order meant opportunity. By carrying it out, he wasn't just eliminating a target. He was proving his loyalty, strengthening his reputation, and securing his place within the gang world. For the Mafia, men like Garcia were tools, disposable yet valuable. If he was caught, he could be replaced. If he succeeded, the Mafia's reputation of fear remained unchallenged. The victim, meanwhile, was collateral in a larger system of control. His refusal to pay was a small act of defiance, but to the Mafia it was intolerable. If one man got away with it, others might follow. That was the risk, and the Mexican Mafia never tolerated risk. This is why Garcia's crime matters. It wasn't the act of one violent gang member. It was the act of an organization, a machine that operated with ruthless precision. The murder was just one thread in a much larger web of control, stretching from prison cells to street corners, binding together the world of gangs under the iron grip of L.A. For nearly a decade, the 2006 murder haunted investigators as an unsolved case. In neighborhoods under the shadow of the Mexican Mafia, silence was often stronger than any badge or subpoena. Witnesses didn't talk. Families didn't cooperate. Everyone understood the consequences. To speak out was to invite a death sentence. For years, the killing seemed destined to remain buried in the growing pile of unsolved, gang-related homicides in Los Angeles. But law enforcement wasn't standing still. Federal authorities had long recognized that local police could only go so far in cracking the Mafia's iron grip. The Mexican Mafia wasn't just a gang. It was a criminal syndicate operating across state lines with deep connections to drug trafficking, extortion, and violence. That made it a federal priority. By 2015, investigators had pieced together the threads of the case. Federal prosecutors built their files slowly and carefully, using intelligence gathered from cooperating witnesses, intercepted communications, and years of groundwork against the Mexican Mafia's taxation system. When the time came, they had enough to confront Porky Garcia with the truth. They knew he was the triggerman in the unsolved 2006 murder. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Garcia did what many soldiers eventually do. He took a plea deal. In September 2015, he pleaded guilty to a federal drug trafficking offense and admitted openly that he had been the one who carried out the execution nearly a decade earlier. It was a stunning confession, not just because it closed a cold case, but because it exposed how deeply tied the murder was to the Mafia's extortion machine. As part of his agreement, Garcia accepted responsibility and faced a sentence of 18 to 24 years in federal prison. For him, the deal may have seemed like the best option. The federal system has no parole. Unlike California state prison, where sentences could be reduced through good behavior credits, a federal sentence meant Garcia would serve the majority of his time behind bars. Yet, for prosecutors, the deal was more than punishment. It was leverage. By forcing Garcia to admit his role, they exposed the Mafia's chain of command and provided another case study of how taxation was enforced with violence. Every conviction added pressure, cutting into the Mafia's ability to project power from behind prison walls. But justice in this case was complicated. For the victim's family, closure came almost 10 years too late. A man who had never joined a gang, never claimed territory, and never signed up for the rules of L.A. had been executed like a soldier on a battlefield. His only mistake was refusing to hand over money that did not belong to the Mafia in the first place. When Garcia stood in court, admitting to the killing, it was a rare moment of accountability in a system designed to bury the truth. For the community, it was proof that the Mafia's iron fist could be challenged. For the Mexican Mafia itself, it was a reminder that law enforcement, slow, patient, and unrelenting, was still closing in. The guilty plea marked the end of one chapter, but it also opened the door to a larger question. What did this case reveal about the Mexican Mafia's taxation system, and how many other lives had been taken in the same brutal fashion, only to remain unsolved? The Eddie Porky Garcia case is more than just the story of one murder. It's a window into the brutal system the Mexican Mafia has used for decades to control the drug trade in Southern California. Taxation. At its core, taxation is simple. Drug dealers must pay a portion of their earnings to the Mafia, or face the consequences. But what makes it terrifying is the enforcement. Violence isn't just a possibility, it's the rule. The Garcia murder in 2006 was one of countless examples where refusal to pay was answered with execution. The Mexican Mafia's taxation system thrives because it is both predictable and absolute. Every dealer knows the rules. Pay, and you can operate, at least until the next demand comes. Don't pay, and you may end up like the victim in Garcia's case, silenced forever. This system creates an atmosphere of constant fear, one where even non-gang members are trapped. The victim wasn't a rival, wasn't a threat. He was simply someone who refused to comply. That alone sealed his fate. And Garcia himself? He was one of many soldiers used to carry out the Mafia's will. Men like him are both feared and expendable. They enforce the tax with blood, while the leaders, safely locked behind prison walls, reap the benefits. Even from maximum security, Mafia shot callers can orchestrate murders, move money, and control entire neighborhoods. But Garcia's eventual guilty plea shows that the system isn't invincible. It took nearly a decade, but law enforcement brought the truth into the light. Federal prosecutors didn't just punish Garcia. They exposed the mechanics of taxation, demonstrating how the Mafia maintains its power through fear. Each conviction weakens the web, sending a message back. The Mafia's grip can be challenged. Still, the bigger picture remains sobering. The Mexican Mafia's taxation system continues to shape the drug trade across Los Angeles and beyond. For every Garcia brought to justice, countless others are waiting in the wings, soldiers ready to enforce the rules, victims too afraid to resist, communities living under the quiet shadow of La M. What the Garcia case reveals most clearly is that the Mafia's power isn't rooted in money alone. It's rooted in fear. The fear that saying no will cost you your life. That fear keeps the tax flowing. It keeps the Mafia's reputation intact. And it ensures that the cycle of violence continues. For the victim's family, Garcia's guilty plea offered closure, but not comfort. The truth was out, but the loss remained. For Eddie Garcia, it meant 2 decades in a federal prison, a heavy price, yet one that still pales compared to the life he took. And for the Mexican Mafia, it was just another transaction, one of countless examples where human life was reduced to a line in their bloody ledger. In the end, the story of Eddie Porky Garcia forces us to ask a haunting question. How many more people have been silenced by this system of taxation? How many murders remain unsolved, hidden under the cloak of fear that the Mexican Mafia so carefully maintains? The Mexican Mafia calls it taxation. But for the people who live under its rule, it's something else entirely. It's not a fee. It's not a business expense. It's a death sentence waiting to be carried out. And as long as the tax exists, so will the blood that pays it.